I need to build 2 tables, both from salvaged lumber. I have some white oak, which came from a tree that was locally cut down, and it was destined to be firewood. I slabbed it up, and I've been drying it for quite a while. And I have this one, which is Douglas fir. It came from an old snooker table and unfortunately had to be dismantled because the basement was built around that table. In this video, I'd like to show you my process for working with salvaged lumber, including all the good stuff and any trouble we might run into as well. And then I'd like to try and answer the question of, even though this material doesn't cost us anything, is it still worth it to use it? So stick around to find out. This is all of the white oak that I have. I think it's going to be plenty. There are some defects that we're going to need to work around, some knots here and there. Not as worried about those as I am with these long cracks. So some of these come in about a foot or so. So hopefully we can work around that and not have to throw some of this material away. So the first thing to do is use our parts list we created in the last video. And I have these special lumber crayons, and we're actually going to lay out every single part on a board to make sure we have enough material before we get started. These boards here are completely filled with defects, and I want the top to look really nice. So I'm not going to use these for the top. I'm going to use these maybe for the feet, something lower down. So I'm going to bring over the nice boards with the top laid out first. You can see that it's fairly flat. We're going to be cutting this into shorter lengths as well. So over that distance, it'll be less of a problem. So these are definitely wide enough. When you're working with solid wood, even though it doesn't look like there's very many cracks at the end, you always want to come in just to make sure you avoid any hairline crack. And we want to go a little bit longer than 762, closer to 800 maybe. And that is going to be top. Also want to check the back just to make sure that it looks all right. And it does look pretty good. So we have a little bit of sapwood over here, and 124.5 is going to bring us, we can go with 130. That's going to be somewhere around that area. So that sapwood is going to be cut off. That's 800. Doesn't look like this is going to be wide enough. This one's going to have to be something else. It may have to be a support piece. It does have a really big knot in here. Or it can be maybe a post as well. So we want to go around 800 or so. Brings us here. Luckily, I have more than enough white oak. Unfortunately, I'm not so sure that's the case with this Douglas fir, so I have to be a little bit more careful. And because it has already been used, there's some good and there's some bad. Look at these gigantic bolt holes in here. And the glue up has actually come apart. If you look here, so that joint needs to go, which makes it a little bit more difficult as well. So I might need to play around with some of the thicknesses on our original design for the Douglas fir version just to make sure that I have enough material. And I have one other idea. I have some maple, which isn't the nicest looking maple in the world. This underneath the table where it's not going to be seen is going to work just fine. That way I can save 2 pieces, which are fairly wide and fairly long as well. So I'm struggling a little bit because I'm having to try and work around these big holes. I don't think this is going to work out as well as I was hoping. So what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to cut out some plugs with this fairly thick Douglas fir. This is actually from the same table. Clear these holes out a little bit larger and maybe change the shape to more oval. Make the corresponding pieces that fit fairly tight. And I'm going to glue them in place with waterproof glue. I have a 2x4. I have the position for the outer or topmost point and the bottommost point, and then I just need to adjust the position because each one of these holes is in a slightly different spot. So here we have 49 millimeters or so, and I have it set up based off of 22. So I need to add 27 millimeters to my X position. pretty close to being centered. Doesn't need to be exact. We're going to wet one of the parts and the glue gets applied to the other. So this is a pretty tight fit. Hopefully it's not too bad to get it in, but if it is a little bit tough, I have one of these guys. See if it can go in. I have a bow tie version too, just because of the way the holes were here, and I added a little bit smaller one too, because this hole was a bit smaller. And the Douglas fir is all laid out. So we have the top sections here. We've got a top here, foot, and the patches are going to be in the foot. So they're not going to be as visible there. That's good. This is going to be cut off. I could use this offcut for the hub if I wanted to, but I have another section here that I can use for the hub. The posts are going to come from here, And this one's going to be a little bit tricky just because of the thickness that we're working with. And then for the supports, I did end up having to use some maple. The next thing we need to do is separate these into individual parts so that they're much more manageable to work with. I'm going to do the exact same thing for all the white oak there as well. So I'm going to be separating this at the bandsaw into 2 pieces. But before I do that, I want to make sure that this edge is square to this face, and I'll be doing that at the jointer. These are all the pieces for the Douglas fir table with the exception of the hub part, and that includes the 2 maple support pieces, and that actually worked out pretty well. The posts are a little bit thinner than I was hoping for, but that's just the material that I had to work with. But for the white oak, it's a different story. I ended up having some more problems. The boards were much more warped, so when I jointed them and planed them down, I was having trouble getting the thicknesses that I wanted, and also there's just a lot more defects to work around. One board in particular, this one here, is so much more dense. And it looks amazing, but I don't think the CNC is going to enjoy going through this material. So I'm going to be really careful with this piece. So here's an example of one of the problems I was having. You see I do have some defects, but those are fixable. I tried to flatten this side. I didn't even flatten it all the way. And already over here, it's too thin. And I haven't even planed this board down. So can't really use this for a top piece unless I wanted to change all of the top pieces. Or another option would be to plane this down, end up with something thinner, and laminate this to another piece of wood. And I didn't really want to do that either. So I went to my local lumber supply shop and I asked them if they had any boards that were full of defects so that I can kind of match this. They didn't really have any that were full of defects, but they did have some that had a few. So hopefully when I joint this and plane it down, it's going to match this fairly well. And this board, which is 6 3/8 inches wide and 6 feet in length, and it's 4/4 or 1 inch thick rough, was over $26 just to buy this, and I can only get 2 top pieces out of it. And you can see how quickly the cost will add up if you're going to buy lumber like this. Now, mind you, working with this lumber is a lot easier because it's much more clear. So hopefully when I joint and plane this down, it'll match it fairly well. And these are the pieces that I have that are good for the top right now. So let's joint this one and plane it and see what it looks like. Hopefully it's an okay match. All right, so let's see if there's any that are a good match. It looks to me like the white oak that I have is quite a bit lighter. Definitely the lack of defects is a little bit of a contrast from the material that I have. But unfortunately, it just is what it is. I'm just going to have to find a way to make this work. I would say the color isn't too far off. Some areas are darker, some areas are a little bit lighter and match up a bit better, like this area here. And this is the piece for the hub. It's not the nicest looking piece, but I think it'll work just fine. It wasn't thick enough as it is, so I'm going to have to laminate a piece to it. And to do that, I'm going to go back to the Gorilla Glue. Just going to moisten this surface with a damp cloth. I have the program loaded and I have the part nailed in position. Now, one of the issues with machining solid wood is that we have some of these defects to work around, specifically these cracks. I'm not too worried about this gnarly grain, but there's a crack on the other side here as well. Now, I recently spoke to Masso, which is the manufacturer of the controller for this CNC machine, to see whether they'd be open to creating a camera system which would mount on the ceiling there. And basically it would take a picture and then lay out where the part is actually going to be positioned on this piece of solid wood. That way we know whether we're going to be avoiding all of the nails, or if you're not using nails and you're using clamps, they might come up against the side or they might come onto the top as well. So that's still important, but most important is actually all of the defects in a piece of solid wood. So they did respond to me, they've sent it to their developers, but if you know of a system that is already created that can do this, please let me know down there in the comments, and I'm definitely interested in testing it out in a future video. For now, what I'm doing is just positioning it manually. I can bring the router down slightly so I can see what's happening on the piece of wood, bring it over to the different points, and make sure that I'm not going to be hitting any nails or clamps or whatever. Here's the bottom, make sure that I'm in good position there, which I am. And then to the far right, that's where the bottom of the foot will be. And it looks like we're in good shape as far as the end and avoiding this crack here too. So I think I'm pretty well ready. I just want to be careful with this one because it is so much harder than all of the other pieces. You can hear that really bogging down like crazy. So this small router really is struggling quite a bit to get through this. This CNC really deserves a proper spindle. So that is definitely part of the plan later on. But for now, what I'm going to do is create a new program, and I'm just going to change the depth so I'm removing a little bit less material each pass. I'm only taking 4 millimeters per pass on this one. If you look at this piece here, it does look like we got all the way through, and still it stayed in position with the tabbing there too. So that's good. We're quite a ways away from this crack. Did still, even at 4 millimeters, struggle through this section, but that's not really a surprise because that is so much more dense. The only thing I'm not too big of a fan of is on a finishing pass, it should be going a little bit faster on the tabbing there. And you can see why it was cracking. There's the center of the tree right there. And there too. So that is not actually very good, but this piece being dry already, it should be fine for this part. All right, so I made a couple little changes. One is that I sped up the ramping, and that way I get a little bit less burning. It looks like it's a bit improved, you can see there. And the other thing that I did was I went the opposite direction on the final pass. And the reason for that is because I wanted to clean up some of these areas here where we have a change in grain direction. Because in one direction, we're gonna get a little bit of this fuzz, but if we go the opposite direction, it should remove it without affecting any of the other material. And I think that is what we are seeing here. Yeah, you can see a little bit better on the burning, and it's much cleaner here. That means less sanding at the end. So this is the last foot, and actually I like this one the most. I was thinking originally to get rid of these holes, but I kind of like the idea of keeping them. If I'm going to keep all the holes, where are they going to be positioned? So this way I get 2 holes, but they're in the center, so that's actually probably going to be the best idea, like that. Let's go with that. So what do you think? Do you like that or no? So I was struggling a little bit to try and find enough material of the Douglas fir to make the posts. And this material looks really good. Unfortunately, it's just a little bit on the thin side. It's thinner than what I was hoping for. And I think when it comes to the posts, it's gonna fail when it comes to the rigidity with these being so thin. Now I could change the shape of it, and that's a possibility, but the white oak is fairly thick. So these are some other pieces of wood which came off of the snooker table. These are the bumper rails, and you can see just how big the snooker table was. So I don't know what material this is, but I think I'll be able to get some of our posts out of this. Maybe from this section alone. This one here has these inset plates, which are a little bit close together, but this one works out perfectly. So let's see if I can make it work with just that piece. It looks like it's going to be plenty thick. They've laminated a pretty big piece of walnut both to the top and to the front as well to make it look a little bit nicer, I guess. They've got the big piece of rubber. This is how they're holding the felt in. On the bottom, it's all stapled. Unfortunately for me, that means I can only get one piece out of here. None of this is going to work, unfortunately. I do have quite a bit of maple that I can salvage from this and use for another project later on, but it's just not going to work for this project. So time for plan B. Now that's the thickness that I was going for. Since my blanks are really only a little bit bigger than they need to be, especially in the length, I'm going to be really careful where I put the nails in this one. So I'm moving the CNC machine to exactly the position it is going to go to. So I'm not too big of a fan of doing this, but I want to be really safe and make sure I don't go through any metal with my router bit. The Douglas fir worked out perfectly. You see the boards were plenty wide. I could connect at the top and at the bottom and still avoid the toolpath. But for the white oak, that is not the case, unfortunately. They are just wide enough to make these parts work. but they are longer. So what we're able to do is connect at the ends with nails to hold this in position. And then I've removed the tabbing along the length and I've added more tabbing along the ends. So let's try that program and see how it works with this part. You can see that the white oak blank is just barely wide enough to fit this piece on. So I do need to be really careful. So what I've done is I've used a pencil just to highlight the edges of the toolpath. And now with those edges highlighted, I can position my blank in place. And as long as I don't see any of those lines that I highlighted, we should end up with a usable part. The tops are going to be machined the exact same way that the supports were machined. That's pretty straightforward, but now we're on to something much more complicated. These are going to be the hubs. They are wider, they are taller, they are longer than they need to be. I'm actually going to have a little bit of trouble nailing these in place, so I'm going to be using the glue gun. We're pretty much ready to go, and the glue gun idea I think is going to work really good. It might be a little tough to get off, but one issue with the glue gun is that it keeps up off the surface slightly, so I did modify the height just a little bit. That way I don't end up with a part that is a little bit too thin when we're done. So that turned out pretty well. The inside is a little bit rough still, but that is because I didn't want to switch to the ball nose cutter. I want to take a look at this measurement versus this measurement and make sure that they actually are going to work together. 8.24, and that's 8. So I'm going to run this toolpath again, and I'm just going to modify the width of this ever so slightly, so it's just a hair narrower. And rather than remachining everything, which would take quite a while, I've just suppressed all of the other machining processes and I'm only machining the tenons again. So this is a great cutter if you're going all the way through the material, but if you're doing something like what I'm doing there, it tends to pull the grain up. For this particular part, I'm going to switch over to this cutter, which is a complete down spiral cutter. No upcut on the bottom. We'll see how that does. So after making all these parts, was it actually a good idea to use salvage wood for these projects? If being efficient with your time, reducing wear on your blades of your machines, and really just finishing your projects quickly are important things to you, then salvage wood, at least the type that I've used today, isn't really a great option. Just to get to the point, to be able to lay out the parts set me back an entire day. Last minute changes because I ended up having to laminate set me back even more. Working around the warp lumber, inconsistent thicknesses, cracks, and knots was also a pretty big pain. From a production standpoint, if you can work with plywood or an engineered wood product and start cutting right away, that's going to be by far the fastest method. But if you're like me and you prefer your furniture to be made from as much solid wood as possible, it is still far better to buy the lumber, but of course that comes at a pretty big cost. Using rough cut pine is a great cheap option, but it is quite weak and soft compared to most other materials, so it isn't always going to be suitable. On the other side of it, using salvage wood for your projects gives them a story, some type of a background, and for some people that's going to be really important. Using materials from the snooker table from when we first moved into our home is important to me, and I've given that lumber a new life. And actually, I've already made several projects from it. The white oak was an old tree that had to be taken down from our neighbor's yard, and it's pretty cool to have something at our home that's made from materials sourced from just around the corner. Of course, there are also lots of savings in the cost of lumber when using salvage wood, but there are other costs if you plan on slabbing your own wood. The chainsaw, the gas, the chain, the maintenance, the time it takes to cut it all up and to dry the lumber, it's not always going to make it worthwhile. In my case, I really like the idea of using these materials because they have that story. And maybe if I were selling them when I'm done, they could fetch a little bit better price as well. But it is kind of hard to justify all the extra time I've had to invest into doing it this way. So I wouldn't really recommend it for anyone trying to make money, but if you have the time and it's for your home or for someone special, it might make a lot of sense. So all in all, I'd recommend plywood first if you can, then solid pine from Home Depot if pine is suitable for your project, then your local lumber supplier for a better selection, and then last, salvage lumber, unless the material is something special and just can't be found anywhere else. I've always used materials I've had available. Most of them were free, but free materials aren't actually free if you consider your time, so I'll be thinking twice before I use salvage materials for future projects. I hope you found this video helpful, and if you enjoyed the video, please like it and subscribe to the channel if you're enjoying this type of content. Thanks as well to each of my patrons for making these videos possible, and thank you for watching. Take care, and hope to see you on the next one. So this is one of the top pieces, and you can see here, they've got some pretty big defects here. So this is one of the top pieces, and you can see here we have some pretty big defects, and so this is one of the top pieces, and we have some pretty big defects here. You can see I didn't even joint the entire surface. So I went to my local lumber supply shop